David Vanderveen, how are you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing great.
we,
Happy to be on your show.
yeah, the post Rob Bell show. It's fantastic to connect, and I'm really glad because, well, just to give a highlight, I suppose we connected via Twitter a few days back, I guess, essentially through a pretty vehement disagreement, I guess you could say.
Yeah, I mean, I think it popped up. I mean, two things. One, I am friends with Rob. We've known each other since college. We both have lived in the same town here in Laguna. But I don't represent or speak for Rob, and I want to be absolutely crystal clear about that.
Yeah, for sure.
I love what he does. I did help put together the companion guide to Love Wins, but I do not speak for him, and nothing I say is Rob's opinion. They're just
completely
my
autonomous.
I think we'll talk about other things than Rob. He did.
Oh, for sure, absolutely. No.
But
100%. I don't even really want to talk about theology, quite honestly.
Yeah. Well, so you and I got into, I think, a little bit of a discussion because of something I had said or written about Wheaton College. Is that right?
Yeah. So I was trying to get my head around this whole thing where a professor essentially, maybe you can fill in some gaps, but she had essentially made a statement to the effect of the God of Islam and the God of the Bible are kind of the same God? Is that a fair analysis? Or
yeah, I mean, I wrote a fairly long-form essay for Sojourners and the Huffington Post that kind of walked through it, and I wrote it very early on in the whole controversy. Larisha Hawkins was a professor at Wheaton College in political science. And during Advent, she's a dedicated Christian. She believes in Wheaton's statement of faith, according to her own, statements. But during Advent, when, and as Christians, we open the doors to the world, as my priest in St. Helena, California, used to say, a religion that started in a barn. It goes without saying, a religion that started in a barn has an open door policy, or at least should. But so she said, "Hey, it's Advent." She said, "I want to be in solidarity with Muslims who are being persecuted unnecessarily, just because they're Muslim. As if they're all extremists, which of course they're not."
Yeah.
And so she decided she wanted to wear a hijab, which is the kind of conservative headscarf, which. The funny thing isn't just worn by Muslims. It's worn by, if you go to Turkey, which, I do business in Turkey, or if you go to anywhere in the UAE or Qatar, it's very common for secular women to wear them just out of, recognition that modesty is kind of part of the cultural context where they are. So it's not just Muslim women, but she decided to wear one in solidarity with Muslim people who are persecuted. And I think as a political scientist, she wanted to kind of see how she would be treated, particularly from strangers, if she was just walking around wearing a hijab. And she had some really remarkable findings. Obviously, there is, she did find unusual treatment because of that. But the school, people reacted to the hijab and said, "Why are you wearing a hijab during Advent?" And then she posted a statement to explain it. And she said, that's when she said, "Hey, look," she based it, and I'm paraphrasing her. You can go to her Facebook page, Larisha Hawkins, and you can see what she actually said. But she said, that she was clear that she's a Christian, that she believes Wheaton's statement of faith, but that in solidarity with Muslims who are, essentially our brothers and sisters, that she is wearing a hijab because, and she quoted Pope Francis saying, because we worship the same God. And where the disagreement came about, and this is what's really sad, is that I don't think this is really a disagreement. I think, and this is what I wrote about, was that because my older son goes to Kenyon College, and he and I were talking about this, and he brought up a really interesting essay by Ralph, and hopefully I can get his name right here. I'm not staring at Ralph Ellis on, and it's a fascinating one. But he talks about how. Hemingway criticized Mark Twain because Hemingway said, Huckleberry Finn, given the context of where he grew up, would not have freed Jim. He would have, when they're going down the river together, he gets picked up by slavers. He goes, he would have written him off and let him go. And it basically, it's a dishonest story to write it that way, even though, it kind of ties the story together for Twain. And, the problem is, if you kind of go down that road, it gives you this deep regret, as a human, I think. And and so that's kind of where the argument. And so for me, I wrote about it saying, look, I wrote about it saying I think there's latent racism and sexism going on. I think they reacted to the hijab, and then that was the emotional response, and then they rationalized rather than apologize. They rationalized their reaction.
They doubled down
by the same God statement, saying, well, essentially that's conflation. That's equating the God of Islam with the God of Christianity with the God of Judaism. And what myself and pretty much every professor or most of the professors at Wheaton, certainly most of them in the Bible department, and most scholars said was, look, all she's saying, if you read what she said, but how she describes this and how she basically came back and said it again, she's basically stating a fact. The God of Abraham is the God of Islam, is the God of Judaism, is the God of Christianity.
Oh my gosh, I never thought about that.
Also the God of the Samaritans, also the God of Mormons, and also the God of Rastafarians. I mean, you can go on and on and on. A lot of people claim that God. That's just a simple fact. Wow. She was very clear that she said, I recognize that I worship that God differently. I view that God differently. I'm not a Muslim. I'm not saying Muslims and Christians are the same religion. But just that, look, we all came, Abraham, God bless him. Abraham had a God, and a lot of people claim that God, and we all, and even within Christianity, right? What's funny is there's a lot of people at Wheaton who wouldn't even view Roman Catholics or Orthodox Christians as Christians. They don't pass the orthodoxy test at Wheaton College these days. But so I just, I did a number of things, but I just basically said I think it's latent racism and sexism, and I think this is not what a school like Wheaton should be about.
Yeah.
And then later, what's really kind of and I got a lot of people liked my article, a lot of people hated my article, a lot of people talked about it. It was one of the most popular posts at Sojourners and with Huffington Post. But I think what was profound was Time Magazine did a special report because they received a series of emails from the provost, Stanton Jones, between him and a professor, where it was much more overt than I thought it was going to be. I thought this was kind of people reacting, not really understanding it, and then rationalizing it. But he was literally saying to this white male professor who said some really aggressive things against the school on her Facebook page, hey, I'll support you. This is bullshit. I'm with you. I'll fight them. Stan Jones calls the professor who wrote on her page much more aggressive things and basically gives them a free, gives them a mulligan, but then does not talk to Larisha Hawkins, immediately puts her on probation without talking to her, and then goes into proceedings to get her fired as the first African American tenured professor at Wheaton College in almost 160 years.
Oh my God.
A school started by abolitionists in America. It used to be one of the Underground Railroad stops. So the irony and the ridiculousness of it all is kind of profound.
Okay, first of all, I have to say you've
actually
blown my mind in the first 10 minutes here. Because I never, you'd like the whole God of Abraham, and I'd never even considered that. I was like, oh my gosh. The second thing I have to put my hand up and say is, look, I'm down here in New Zealand. I have, I'm completely, which I think works for and against me in some ways, but, I've had some people point out that they appreciate the fact that I'm, away from this American culture and things like that. I have a bit of distance and, things, but, yeah, I kind of have to go with you on pretty much everything you just said, quite honestly.
I don't think there's an argument. I mean, frankly, I think it's basically people who made an emotional reaction and then tried to rationalize it and doubled down, and now they're in so deep that they can't stop digging, and unfortunately, it ended really kind of badly for everybody. Larisha Hawkins.
Where have we seen behavior like this in the evangelical church before?
Yeah, like pretty much everywhere, right? See, they weren't even shooting their wounded. They should have been celebrating what she was doing. It's exactly the kind of things that they should be doing at a place like Wheaton College.
Yeah.
It's the kind of conversations, whether people agree or disagree, they should be having. It's well within their statement of faith.
Oh, for sure.
It's a really interesting thing for a political science professor to do.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, part of the reason that I jumped in on this, was because I got kicked out of Wheaton for a poem many years ago in 1990.
Oh dear.
And it became national news, and that's part of the long form essay because I'm comparing and contrasting some of the things. the administration, the funny thing is the administrators, the president of the school, the vice president of student development, and the dean of men at the time, they all came back to me and asked to meet, and kind of, they didn't, I mean, I'm paraphrasing, they sort of apologized and said essentially, look, the board of trustees made us do it. We wouldn't have handled it this way. We were forced to kick you out. There were a million reasons they could have kicked me out of Wheaton. Trust me, we had the Church of Reason. We were throwing, some pretty epic parties that were against the pledge at Wheaton. There's plenty of reasons they could have kicked me out. The poem was a stupid one. We created our own newspaper called the Ice Cream Socialist, and I had a poem about surfing that had some racy stuff in it. But certainly not racier than stuff I read in my classes at Wheaton. But that became a free speech rally. Of course, we let both sides speak because it was truly free speech. And and I think what I was basically pointing out was the most interesting one I found out later. The vice president of student development was a wonderful man who felt very bad about what he had to do. Reacted emotionally when he called me, because what I would do is kind of funny. I had my own political party called the Church of Reason, which was kind of obviously making fun of overly rationalizing your faith, and we would run candidates in elections and have philosophical debates, whatever, satirical debates. But when I would get a note from like the dean of men or the vice president of student development to call me on the carpet for something that we were being tattled on for, I would have my minister of information, Martin Baumgartner, send a note back to them saying, "Thank you for contacting Mr. Vanderveen. Please contact me early. It's convenient. We'll try and schedule an appointment." And it would just drive them bonkers, right? Like, what student is willing to do this? So he was reacting pretty aggressively to that note, which was designed to get people to react like that.
Yeah.
And so it was kind of, to me, it was just part of the game that we were all playing there.
Mm.
And later, I think he felt really kind of bad about where it ended up. And after I got kicked out, I finished at Calvin College, but after I got kicked out, people were sending him pornography, and not me or anyone I knew, but this was national news. It was in the New York Times. It was in the front page Chicago Tribune. My parents found out because it was on the television. But people were sending him pornography in the mail. People were all over him, and he didn't show up for the last 6 months or the last semester of his work because he was scared to death that it was going to happen again.
Oh, wow.
And I used this Ralph Ellis piece to say, the problem with following Hemingway's advice of just do the thing that you're enculturated to do is you will live in fear and hide from cracks in the sidewalk because you didn't do the thing that your heart told you had to do. And what I was encouraging Wheaton to do is get back to its father's business. Get out of this bigotry and orthodoxy policing, which has nothing to do with how the school was founded. Billy Graham, his son Franklin is so different than Billy, but
No
Billy,
shit.
everyone jokes about this, right? But Billy Graham has all these countless quotes saying, "Oh yeah, I'm sure we're going to see Muslims in heaven. I'm sure we're going to, I think we're going to be really surprised by the great and wondrous mercy and grace of God." And Franklin couldn't be further from that. He wants to, make sure everyone burns in hell for, forever,
terrifying,
and conscious
isn't it?
torment. Yeah, and it's
My gosh.
and it's frankly, it's the natural. If you can almost follow any father that builds something, a large construct like Billy has, the son who isn't really worthy, who steps into his shoes, becomes a clown, right? His feet don't fit, and it's exactly what you see there. There's other examples, but I think so that's sad. But I think if you look at Billy Graham as an example, he'd be kicked out of Wheaton based on what he's been saying, what he said.
Oh, I'd love to see that.
C.S. Lewis, we have the Tolkien and the Lewis archives at Wheaton. C.S. Lewis would be thrown out of Wheaton College. Rob Bell's Love Wins. I joke about this all the time. Love Wins is basically chapters 8 and 10 from The Problem of Pain.
Yeah.
It's the way Rob tells it. It brings us all forward and it brings us into it. But I think, and that's my opinion. Rob didn't plagiarize anything, but he told it in his own way. But I think we're all heavily influenced by those thinkers and by their ideas. And Rob, of course, adds a lot to it. But those ideas are not welcome today at Wheaton College, which is actually housing those ideas, which is so, absurd. It's crazy. So I had a really good, one of my college professors, Bruce Benson, who was, He is literally the greatest living phenomenologist of music. There's two big schools of thought in philosophy. There's, rationalism, and there's continental philosophy, or phenomenology is a big part of that, existentialism, etc. He's literally the greatest living phenomenologist of music in the world. Was thrown out of Wheaton recently,
Wow.
For other non-rational issues.
Yeah.
Because the Orthodoxy police got a hold of him, and I found out. I was at Peter Rollins' Tricks of the Light philosophy conference in his deconstructionist conference in Belfast, and I was having lunch with Jack Caputo, and famous deconstructionist, and he told me that Bruce got kicked out, and told me the some details about what had happened, and I couldn't believe how they absolutely screwed him, just absolutely took full advantage of him, and it was so unchristian, so unhealthy. I mean, even people who don't have the moral basis that a Christian school should have, that should distinguish them, shouldn't treat humans that way.
Yeah.
And it made me so angry. And when I saw it happening again with Larisha Hawkins, it was really upsetting. And then all of a sudden now, the problem with the skeleton in the closet is there's never one. And so if Time is has a whole series of stories that are starting to come out, and they're filtering them out story by story. But they hired an LGBTA. Hopefully, I'm getting that all right. The acronym,
but letters nowadays.
Yeah, whatever.
I.
Basically, they hired a gay blogger chaplain specifically to help them with gay students who are having all kinds of, you can imagine, problems if you're constantly being told you're going to hell because you're this way. And she was having all of these great, really helping some of these students, making huge progress on the campus. And basically, trustees couldn't handle it when they found out that Wheaton had hired a gay chaplain, and so she was, basically forced out. And when they hired her, they knew she was gay, and they knew she was a blogger, and they knew she spoke nationally. And it's this kind of thing where, on one side, I appreciate that Phil Ryken, I think, is trying to make some changes, but I'm really disappointed in the lack of cojones, to put it, simply, to follow through, because you don't get change. If you want to, shift from driving on the right side of the road to the left side of the road, you don't drive down the middle. You don't have everyone drive down the middle.
It's a transition period.
Right? You got to shift gears. You got to do it. And you got to just stick passionately behind it. You got to force it through. And and you got to, and especially when your big donors, especially when your trustees get angry, that's when you stick to your guns the hardest.
Yeah.
That's when you say, this is the right thing, this is where we're going, this is what we're doing, and we are doing this together. And the problem is, the second it gets tough, they vacillate, fall back, and get really,
This is fascinating. I mean, this is quite obviously a detailed conversation about Wheaton, and obviously some people are so far removed from that, but it still fascinates me, because as I've actually sort of reflected to you, I mean, I'm sort of seeing myself go down this kind of almost religious journalism kind of road, and I don't know where the heck to start. I mean, this is why I adore Milo, and I have to say, I mean, I almost want to do what he's doing for religion, because he's pushing. I mean, on the subject of things like racism and things, I mean, let's dive in. I mean, whatever.
Well, here's if I can give a little context, because I think it's going to lead us where you're going. The reason this matters is because Wheaton is, it's been termed, I think it wasn't Wheaton didn't name themselves this. I think it was one of the school reviews called it the Harvard of the evangelical, Harvard of the Christian colleges, right? So it's very iconic among Christian private education. It's not supposed to be Bob Jones. It's not supposed to be fundamentalist. And I think what's happening right now in the in the Protestant community is there's this point where it's kind of like Wheaton said, they reconcile with Larisha Hawkins, but she's not there, and they're apparently happy not to have her. People are claiming divorce as reconciliation, and I think what's happening right now is there is just this massive split happening, where people probably like you and me are just saying, you know what, I'm not doing this anymore. I'm not going to show up and play pretend like it's all okay when Grandpa uses, really inappropriate language at the dinner table. We're going to stop using the N-word, or I'm going to go eat dinner someplace else because I can't take this shit anymore. Yeah. Right? So, and I think that's essentially where we're at, and that's why I think it matters for everyone.
For sure.
Yeah.
And I guess just to say, I mean, immediate sort of knee-jerk response to you on Twitter was essentially like, I just wanted to, like, my impulse, and I know that we had this kind of like, you know, figuring out where each other were coming from sort of a thing, but
right.
of course, which is totally human, right?
Sure.
But the thing is, I just wanted to know what I wanted to get to the facts. Like, I just wanted to know exactly what was being said. And this is, you know, this is one of Milo's quotes, you know, where he says, the left seems to be more about narrative over fact. You know, they push the story, and this has been proven with, you know, things like there was a high-profile sort of rape case reported on in Rolling Stone that got completely debunked. But they ended up sort of coming out and saying, well, at least we have to talk about these things, you know? And you have
to talk about them honestly with follow-up with, right?
Exactly.
You're right.
That's what I said you know, I said this to Rob yesterday. Milo has this quote where he says, you can't solve a problem when you lie about it in your first sentence. You know?
Right.
And this is where I'm really keen to get into this because, I mean, of course, the subject of racism doesn't, I don't think about it that much. I mean, ironically, I work right now in a day-to-day job environment where I am the racial minority, which is quite funny to me. You know, and I'm glad for that. I'm so thankful because it is an experience and it does make you think and it does.
Wait, so can you tell me about that? Because I don't know what you do day to day. Exactly.
I just essentially work in a call center. It's like inbound sales calls for an internet company. You know,
And do you work with a lot of Maoris?
No. Well, they're actually Indian people primarily that
Indians.
I work with. Yeah.
Indians.
So yeah.
Okay.
Well, the whole Māori culture thing in New Zealand. I live in New Zealand. I don't even feel qualified to speak about that, quite honestly. But there are definitely. I mean, here's the thing. I mean, you know, because Milo's doing this, you know, this dangerous faggot tour thing in America at the moment, and you know, he's been getting a lot of, you know, a number of, you know, Black Lives Matter protesters, right? And he says himself, he goes, there are absolutely grievances. There are absolutely issues here. But he goes, I do not see Black Lives Matter as the response. I do not see value in this. And because he's like, it has become divisive. I don't know, disagree profoundly if you want, I don't care. But, you know, he seems to believe that it's more fueled by white guilt more than anything. You know, I don't know what your thoughts are.
I think a couple of things, right? To his point, you've got people in a political battle, not a debate. So you end up with people trying to win rather than to try and seek truth. And I think that's where he's probably right, that it's problematic. But it's highly emotionally charged and fueled, and there have been some kind of, you know, there have been some horrific in America we have not, you know, historically we've had a lot of issues with how we treat minorities, and particularly African Americans. And so there are things that need to be addressed. I think the problem is it's hard to have an honest conversation because everyone is so emotionally charged that it's almost, how do you come to the table and talk about this in any way that where you like, who's coming to the table to build common ground would be my question. And I think maybe that's where he and Rob would kind of agree, right? Where it's like, okay, forget about reacting to the critics, forget about reacting to all of the, you know, the problems. Let's come together to find solutions. Let's come together to find common ground. You know, if the answer is we have to give every African American person an Oscar until racism ends the Oscars, that doesn't really make the Oscars a better ceremony, or a better thing, though, award. Isn't
it? These movements that are supposedly about empowerment. I mean, you know, Milo's big thing is feminism, right? I mean, you've got first wave feminism, second wave feminism, and then you've got what they call, you know, essentially third wave feminism, or, you know, postmodern feminism sort of thing. The first two, Milo fundamentally goes along with. The third one, he does not, and nor do I, quite frankly. Because it's become this victim narrative. It's become this thing. And I talked to this girl, Lauren Southern. She's a Canadian sort of political activist. She's probably the most famous anti-feminist on the planet, sort of thing, in her demographic, you know. But it is disempowering. I mean, she said to me that she went to a classroom, like a social justice sort of class, where they literally split the room by gender and sexuality and said, you're victims and you're not, and you're oppressed and you're the oppressor. And it's literally scripting a narrative. Like, this is crazy what is actually going on.
Well, I really like what Morgan Freeman said on 60 Minutes, where he was asked, what he thought about, Black History Month, and his response was to the interviewer who was Jewish. Well, what do you think about Jewish History Month? I mean,
Yeah.
why don't we have History Month?
Yeah.
And I think what I think we need. It'll probably be another generation before we hopefully can move past race, and not say, well, we didn't get enough black people, or we didn't get enough white people, we didn't get enough women, we didn't get enough gays, we didn't get enough. I mean, look, how about we just focus on, let's get the right people in the room, let's get the right people being awarded.
Yeah.
Because once we stop labeling everybody, whether you're being oppressed or whether you're the oppressor, once you just stop looking at it and it becomes transparent, you stop worrying about it, right? Yeah. And I think that's kind of I'm paraphrasing Morgan Freeman, but I was really impressed with his response.
Yeah.
When we truly can say, hey, that's, or like Chris Rock said that. He said, we don't, part of the problem is the categories that we have at the Oscars. We have the best female and the best male actor. He goes, it's not like what's his name? It's not like Robert De Niro has to slow down so women can be better actresses. It's not the Olympics, right? I mean, this is, women are, Meryl Streep is a great actress, with or without Robert De Niro, with or without a male. I mean, I think we need to just start. It would be great if they had an Academy Awards where there were no categories based on sex, race, gender, et cetera. If they just say, hey, who's the best person in this category? The best human being? Because that's what we all are.
Yeah, well, I guess it's interesting because it's a whole kettle of fish, a can of worms, I guess is the word, with this whole gender thing, right? Because now you've got, go on to Tumblr, for goodness sake. There's more genders than you can, count on two hands. Like, it's just getting pretty wacky, quite honestly. And where do you begin? This is why I'm so glad to connect with, Ralph and yourself and different ones, because I'm like, I need some calm, reasonable voices on the table here, because I'm finding myself getting so fed up with this discussion. The sort of anti-feminist rhetoric annoys me as much as anything else right now.
Well, right. It's like Christian music. It's when MLK talked about having a dream where people didn't see race anymore. I think he was actually talking about not seeing race anymore, not stopping labeling people, right? Yeah. When if you go to the I love the Dominican Republic because everyone's just kind of coffee colored, right? It's just they're a mix of different colors and races, and they're all kind of the same. It's the ultimate kind of mulatto look, and they're beautiful people, but nobody's like, oh, you're black and I'm white. It's just they're all kind of the same color, and I don't want everyone to be the same. That doesn't solve the problem either. But I would love to get to that point where we just we stop labeling everybody and we just say hey, you did a great job at that, or you could do better, and we focus on doing the work and doing the right work and doing the best we possibly can and finding our thing that we're supposed to be pursuing with all of our passion and energy and doing it better than anyone ever has before, whatever that is. And because that's where you find fulfillment. Once you label it Christian music, you can maybe target market it and sell it better, but it's guaranteed to be shittier music than music, right?
It's funny you say that. On the subject, sorry, just jump in. On the subject of Christian music, I interviewed Reese Roper. He was the lead singer for a band called Five Iron Frenzy. I don't know if you know them, but they were quite big. They were like a ska band back in the day,
Awesome,
and I said to him, do you think that you guys would have done all right without the Christian scene? And his response was literally, I think we would have done better.
Yeah. Well, and the problem is at the beginning stage, they probably had a much better deal to go Christian. Like somebody snapped them up and said, hey, here's a check, and we're gonna pull you in. And what you give up, you accept the good for the great, right? You give up the opportunity to be great to be good. I think U2 is a much better example, right? Where they're just, people may or may not love U2. That's a personal choice.
I adore U2. They're amazing.
I just happen to be a huge U2 fan, and I've loved them since I was in middle school when they were actually a punk band.
Yeah.
There was a stage, like I was embarrassed to go to Joshua Tree because I still had Dead Kennedys albums, and Joshua Tree was so mainstream. It was like going to a Touch of Grey concert with the Grateful Dead. It was just like,
Well, like my older brother, he's been to 5 or 6 U2 live concerts, and I grew up, listening to them by default because of him. And Oh my gosh,
Yeah.
Bono would be amazing. He's on my wish list, but probably never happen. But who knows? He would be amazing. But
Kathleen Falsani is good friends with Bono. She's gotten us backstage a bunch of times. So
oh god.
Play your cards, man. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, oh my goodness, who knows? With the people I'm getting at the moment, I mean, it's blowing my mind. It really is. It really is quite crazy. I'm just this random guy in New Zealand with a Skype and a microphone. It's insane. But yeah, it is interesting. And again, I mean, it really is. I mean, there seems to be on the sort of progressive left. I'm not going to name names, but I mean, I'm connected with a guy on Facebook who's essentially working for a progressive Christian publishing company. And there's a title of a book that's come out called Brown is the New White. And I heard this title and I was like, what? You know when you just don't like something and you don't know why straight away? You kind of go, this doesn't sit right with me. Like, what is this? And I started reading about it and it was kind of about race relations and blah, blah, blah. And it seemed to have some good intention, but I was like, this title, in my opinion, is just race baiting. I was like, what the heck is going on? And I said this to this guy. I said, this is race baiting, dude. And he goes, his immediate response was, only white supremacists use the term race baiting. I was like, cool, thanks. You just called me a racist. Thank you very much. Have a nice day. Like,
call me a Nazi.
Oh my gosh, it's insane. And this is, this is what, I mean, I hate to keep going back to Milo, for example, but he's literally right now having these debates on campuses. And, what's happening, I mean, the first couple of events, he had these crazy, like, red paint, people, painting your faces, and people with ear horns and just trying to drown them out. But now what's happening is he's slowly starting to have these kind of conversations with these people that fundamentally disagree with him. And they get up and they don't ask a question. They get up and they start making statements, and he kind of lets them go on, and he goes, "But what's your question? What's your question?"
Right.
And it's quite profound, And and again, like he's saying, you have legitimate grievances, but they're talking about this whole safe space thing, right? And they said,
No,
sorry, just to say, like what one person said to him was, put yourself in the shoes of someone who'd just been sexually assaulted. Like, shouldn't they be able to come to college the next day and find a safe space? And he goes, no, they should go home for a long time. He's like, I have experienced people who have been through these things and they don't come back to college for a while. Like, college is a place to learn. It's not a home. It's not a safe space. Nor should it be. It's a place to be challenged. It's a place to grow. He says, if you think that you come to college to not have your opinions disagreed with, to not be challenged, and to have this essentially a safe space, he goes, you should be immediately expelled because you have no intellectual humility. He said you should be expelled.
Right. I can't comment on the sexual assault and whether or not people should have safe space at school, but I think to your point and his point about the reason you go to college isn't to just, and I said that recently in a piece, I just said, look, I didn't go to Wheaton College because I thought I'd agree with everybody or because I wanted to reinforce my inherited ideas, about religion. And I went there because I have this passionate embrace, this wrestling that I think is really profound in my life with the great mystery of the universe. And the reason I'm very comfortable with that is because I love mystery. And if you learn to love mystery, then you don't fear doubt. You embrace it, and you're like, man, I don't know sometimes. I don't have the answer. In fact, I've written columns, over the years, and like here in Laguna and for the Orange County Register, and people would say to me, they come up to me in the street and they say, hey, David, I really enjoy reading your column. I don't always agree with it, but I enjoy reading your column. And I say, look, I don't always agree with my column. I'm trying new ideas on half the time to see what other people say about it.
For sure.
That's how we actually find out what we think is the most true thing, and it changes. And there's people like, well, it has to be. Well, what is that? What if you change your mind later? I'm like, well, you should change your mind later. I mean, truth should be, in my opinion, progressive. It should be fluid. There should be very, very, very few truths that are absolute. I think most of what we think are true are just kind of applications of truth, and that stuff should be changing as our culture changes and as our ethics change.
So I wonder, David, if you can speak, and I know that I'm essentially throwing things at you that you may not be as familiar as I am with, and I can appreciate that for sure. But I think that puts you in a better position, quite honestly, because I wonder if you can, like, offer this sort of outside voice of reason here to these kind of people who are, you know, essentially, whether it's feminism or racism, whatever it is, you know, when you've got one side going, the other side's an idiot, the other side's an idiot, and the other side's just going, the other side are hateful, the other side are hateful. Like,
Well,
what do we do?
right. Well, I think obviously when you're pointing fingers, right, as somebody pointed out to me, one's pointing out, one's pointing straight up, your thumb, and three are pointing back. You know, and I think the question is, you know, am I becoming, like I think you were pointing out to me, you know, aren't you just calling somebody a Nazi as bad as the person who's, you know, I don't think I was actually calling anybody Nazis, because then you automatically lose the debate. But the, you know, what I would say is, you know, if you always have to be on guard that you're not becoming the bigot that you were fighting against, right? The ultimate Animal Farm
Yeah, well,
analogy.
to quote Bono, I mean, he says that great line where he says, I pray that we don't become a monster in order to defeat a monster, you know?
Which is always the problem. And I think, you know, when we had a free speech rally, when I was getting kicked out, when I was upset that a liberal arts college, a great liberal arts college in America, was throwing a student out for a poem, you know, just the irony alone there is crazy. You know, one of the things we decidedly did is we got a megaphone and gave it to anybody. And some of the people there really didn't like me and really didn't like what we had done and had every right and opportunity to speak as long as they wanted to. Because I said, if we're going to do a free speech rally, it's not free speech if it's just the people that agree with us.
Yeah.
Right, and I think that's where you're going with this. And I think,
For sure.
I think the most important thing is learning to listen, and that's the hardest part. And not just listening to the words people say. And this is kind of, you know, where I think I've been very successful with the energy drink company I started, and you know, working with the Amway business, how we distribute it, is when you meet with you know, literally, I'm in front of hundreds of thousands of people a year. I'm dealing with people all over the world. We're in 40 odd markets with our drinks. Sometimes people are really happy to see us. Sometimes people have a problem with something we're doing. I've learned to be as quiet as possible when I'm in that situation, and not just listen to the words that are coming out of their mouth, but really try and figure out what's going on behind those words.
Yeah.
Because the words are usually, it's kind of like with Larisha Hawkins. The reasons they gave for getting rid of her really weren't reasons. It was a foolish argument.
Yeah.
There was something else going on behind that, and I think that's what I was trying to point out in my long form essay, which Time Magazine not only validated, but of course even showed it to be a lot further along than I had thought it was, you know, a lot more overt. But I think that's what you need to focus on, and that's the only place you're going to find common ground. Why is this person hurting? Why is this person misbehaving irrationally from my perspective?
Yeah.
Why are they doing that? Because from their perspective, it's like, you know, One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest is such a great book because it showed that crazy people aren't really crazy.
Yeah.
They're acting rationally. They're just reacting to different phenomena than we are.
Wow.
They're perceiving the world differently.
Wow.
And I think if you take the time to listen, and not listen to their words, but try to understand what's the phenomena that they're reacting to that seems so strange and wild and out of place. Because if I can understand that, I might react the same way they are. Rob has this great saying when he you know,
this is really helpful.
He talks to a lot of atheists who are like, well, Rob, you know, I can't believe, you know, and they'll go through this litany of what they think he thinks God is. And he always asks them, well, what do you think God is? Tell me about this God that you're so upset about. And they go through all these attributes that they hate about God. And almost every time they'll say, you know, I agree with you.
Yeah, I don't believe in that God either.
I don't believe in that God either.
Yeah.
And I think, you know, that's an example of how you do it, you know, on a religious debate. But I think there's so many areas of our life, whether it's social, cultural, political. Like I was talking today with a friend of mine at the gym who's, you know, I like to ask people what presidential candidate they're supporting, not because I care about the candidates, but I'm always curious why somebody has come to that decision.
Yes.
So somebody said to me they're supporting Donald Trump, which I literally think is insane.
Marlo calls him Daddy.
But I think what's fascinating, and this is what's really interesting, is why do they support him? Because on the surface, he's behaving irrationally, right?
Yes.
And even I think even a bigger, why is Donald Trump behaving that way? Why is Bernie Sanders behaving that way? You know, they're all reacting to phenomena that they're observing in a way that they think is very rational and the right way to do it.
Exactly.
I don't think any of them are doing this I'll even give Donald Trump a little mulligan here. I don't think any of them are doing this as with bad intentions. I think they think they're going to make the world a better place.
I don't think so at all. Just to speak to this point, and then I do want to kind of transition because I want to chat to you about this kind of entrepreneur kind of stuff because this is relevant to me. But I mean, somebody I had on my podcast recently just wrote a blog about Donald Trump, and it was so funny. And it was essentially going, man, there's so much systemic racism and bigotry, and I'm going, no, you don't understand. I mean, just to highlight the point, and again, I'm talking about things you may not understand, but this was this whole phenomenon with this Gamergate thing, right? Where you had these people that essentially paid no attention to the news, they paid no attention to politics until they started getting reported on, right? And then they started going, oh, wow, you're just telling us that we're horrible people. And of course there's going to be a reaction to that. And this is what, it's really fascinating. I mean, when I spoke to Milo back in December, he said to me, with all this what they call social justice warrior kind of rhetoric, he said, there is going to be a response to this that is uniquely Christian. And I thought that this is coming from a gay Catholic conservative. It's crazy. But it's proven to be true. I mean, there was a guy, just to close the point, there was a guy outside of one of his debates essentially disagreeing with his ideology, but he held a sign that said, are our liberal ideologies so fragile that we can't let him speak? Right? And I actually retweeted that photo to Milo. He retweeted it and it got like 200 retweets. I was like, this gives me hope. Like, this literally gives me hope to see this. And clearly it resonated with other people because, as I say, it got like 200 retweets. And I was like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. That guy probably got crucified for holding that sign, but that's not the point.
Yeah, well, no, but I think that's right. People, look, we're all constructing gods, right? And this is kind of my problem with orthodoxy in general is you're not talking about God. You're talking about the construction you made and why this construction is better than the other guy's construction. Granted, there are true things, and I think there is truth behind it, but the truth is behind it. The truth isn't the thing that you constructed, and that's where people, I think, get ultimately confused. That's why I love deconstructionism. And I think what happens in fragile orthodoxies is people have to create monsters that they can sacrifice to their God to prove that their God is powerful.
Yeah.
And so what they end up doing is they end up manufacturing, monsters, creating straw men that they can sacrifice on an altar to this God they've constructed, so they can prove to the world that this idea is powerful and strong. And if you don't behave, you might get sacrificed on this altar as well. And I think the best thing you can do in the face of that is just say, good luck. I'm gonna go where they have stronger gods that don't require sacrifice. Yeah. This is just ridiculous.
Just to transition a little bit, because you gave me a brilliant segue there, because you were talking earlier about the whole rational responding to different things sort of phenomena. That fascinates me, and I mean, I was quite open with Rob about the fact that I'm diagnosed as bipolar, and back in 2008 I had a sort of a hypomanic episode and things like that, and I've come across a number of people on YouTube and online that are sort of having these struggles as well, and they're some of the smartest people I've ever met in my life, quite honestly, and you kind of go, what, these people aren't, this whole mental health thing, it doesn't mean you're stupid, it doesn't mean that at all.
No, in fact, most people who are bipolar, manic depressive, have very high IQs. I mean, that's actually
well, I think I'm one of those. I think they call it autodidact. I think where you kind of just teach yourself things, right? That's how I seem to function. And I'll read a book or hear something, and I just resonate, and I just take it to this extreme and learn every nuance about it. But I do want to talk about this because you are an entrepreneur, and you're a successful entrepreneur, I guess you could say. I am in the process of hopefully being one too, because I have this personality where I get an idea, I think it's good, I run with it, I bounce it off other people, I'm okay with disagreement, I understand. I mean, my friend Jacob, so he's a millennial, he's 25, 26, him and I are basically co-creators of this music app idea, this podcasting music sort of app that we're coming up with, and him and I have the most intense conversations about these ideas. We'll be literally talking on the phone, and I'm like, no, Jacob, you're an idiot. No, you're wrong. And he just listens, and he just takes it all on board, and he doesn't get offended, and it just creates this incredible space for creativity. And I wonder if you've had that experience. I don't know whether that's normal. I don't know what's going on. It's just this thing that happens, and it seems to create, when you kind of take away the ego and have this kind of dialogue, the amazing things seem to emerge.
So is the question about? I'm missing the question. So is the question about entrepreneurship?
Yeah, for sure. Like that. I guess I'm asking you as the kind of person you are. Like, I mean, this is a very personal kind of conversation.
Yeah.
How do I navigate? I don't know what's normal.
Yeah. Well, so I think the most confusing thing about being an entrepreneur is people tend to want to be entrepreneurs because, either they're looking for some extraordinary success, they're not happy with the rewards at their job, or because, I think this is the right reason, because their creativity demands it. They have this inner urge they can't even define that requires them to go out and do things that really don't make sense, that to some people may seem crazy or that don't fit into the mainstream. And you become smarter over time about how to do that. So it's actually, it has hopefully some kind of a profit motive and you can sustain it. But, at the end of the day, I think ultimately the most confusing thing about being an entrepreneur is most people become an entrepreneur to be successful. But the way you become a successful entrepreneur is by working through constant failure, even when you're successful, and learning to not fear failure, kind of like learning not to fear doubt.
I literally said this. So I spoke to Paul Young, who wrote The Shack, on my podcast, and he's amazing. I mean, he said to me when he said he printed 15 copies of this book, and he goes, when I had those 15 rough copies, he goes, that's all I ever wanted from this, right? That was what he said to me. And I said this to him. I was chatting to him through Skype the other day, and I said, I'm coming to a place in my life where I'm fundamentally okay with failure. And he said to me, his response was beautiful. He goes, there's no such thing as failure as long as there's movement.
Right. Progression.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's why I'm such a huge, ultimately, a lot of these, I don't believe in 5-year plans. I think that's kind of ridiculous.
Somebody asked me that the other day. I was like, what?
Yeah. I have a very large business today. We sold it to Amway last year, and I'm running that business for Amway. It's a great relationship. We're doing very, very well. We're growing like crazy, expanding into new markets, expanding into new categories. And so there are rational exercises we have to do to manage that. But part of our whole focus is we really operate based on experience. We operate in the now as much as possible. Social media drives that more. People who can't do that fail on social media pretty consistently because you're constantly getting this live feedback where you can test all these ideas, and a lot of them will fail, and you'll find the ones that really resonate, and then you can drive deeper on the ones that resonate. But I think what's almost like live market research with, really testing things out in public. But what I guess where this is going is that, what you have to learn to love is that failure and love that just as much as the success rather than counting it as wins and losses.
Because you
I think
learn from it, right? I literally closed the podcast with Rob by saying that. I said, don't we have to learn everything the hard way? Isn't that how it works?
Well, and learn to love the hard way. It's like surfing. When you first start surfing, it's really painful. I just took some guys today. When you start surfing, it's really painful. You're using muscles you've never learned. You fall all the time. You're sucking in water. You're taking waves on the head. But the only way that you get better is by going back out and using those muscles again and getting sore and learning to love the soreness, because you start to realize, that soreness is what's actually going to make me this better, bigger person than I was before, than I was before I entered the water. And that's ultimately, when you learn that, the soreness becomes the source of greatness, the source of inspiration, the source of, I'm at a point at 47, I'm 47 today. If I don't have soreness in my life every day, I feel like I'm really failing, like I'm not doing something.
Love it.
I ski and snowboard. When I was younger, my cousin and I were skiing someplace. I was probably in high school, and I was really proud of the fact that I hadn't fallen that day. We were doing moguls and jumps, and I was like, I haven't fallen all day. And my cousin goes to me, he goes, well, if you haven't fallen, you haven't been trying very hard. Right? And so I've got a lot of scar tissue, but you learn how to fall. You learn how to not hurt yourself as much every time you go down.
Yeah. And
you learn that going down and getting back up is the only way you're ever going to progress, if you're interested in the idea of progression as a human. And to me, I'm 47 and I'm still trying to get better at adventure, at sports, at business, at ideas. I was just thinking about the other morning in the shower, because when you're in the middle of these battles and then you're checking. I always like to check myself, like, okay, are you becoming the bigot that you're fighting? That's one of my big questions I'm always posing to myself. And I'm sitting there, and I was responding to an email from my aunt who was questioning some of the things that I'd written in a nice, loving way. And I said, I think we have to believe in a God big enough that she will surprise us with ideas we never thought orthodox, that we may have thought were heretical.
Yeah.
And when we believe in a God that's big enough for that, that's probably actually God.
Yeah.
Because if it's a God that we can predict, it doesn't then it really doesn't read like. And it doesn't read like any God you see in the Bible, if that's the God you think is your God.
Yeah.
Because the God in the Bible is incredibly unpredictable, whether it's Paul or Peter or Abraham or Jesus, for crying out loud. I mean, they're all constantly surprised. They're all constantly amazed. And the thing that makes people of God are the people who are willing to go and do the thing that everyone else is telling them, build an ark. What? I love Bill Cosby. Let's keep his private life out of this, but I love Bill Cosby's his whole skit on Noah and the ark, and God telling Noah to go build the ark, and he's like, "What? Are you kidding me?" But I think if you really believe in that God who's so big, that God that she will surprise you, I think that's when you get to the point where, and by the way, Ruach in Hebrew, the breath of God, the Holy Spirit is feminine. Feminine now,
No. I love that stuff. I love it.
So, and I think that's the part of God that really engages us and surprises us and moves us to do things we never thought we'd be able to do. My favorite verse in the Bible is Genesis 1:2, and the Spirit of God hovered over the water.
Yeah.
That ultimate creation event.
It's like this what's going to happen next kind of question, right?
Yeah, and I think that our engagement with that, our wrestling with that, I mean, the greatest icons of the Bible are people who wrestled with God, who didn't agree with God, who told God to effectively, screw off. Those are the people that became the great ones, and they didn't become the great ones because they had it right. Right? They didn't become the great ones because they built the box. It's funny. Jesus, at the Annunciation or the, when he's on the mountain and Elijah comes down and Moses comes down, the first thing the disciples want to do is to construct these booths for those guys.
Just box it in.
Right? The first thing let's lock them in, man, build some cages, and it's like, no, that's not, you're missing the point, right? It's all about setting it all free. Be surprised, be amazed. It's all around you. Just open your eyes and let yourself be surprised by the great mystery that is permeating everything we do every single moment.
I didn't really intend on saying this, but you've got me thinking. I mean, this is why I find atheism so incredibly boring. Like, just absolutely boring, right? Because all they're doing is going, that's not true, that's not true, that's not true. Like, what? It's just... Well, I said this...
It's very...
No, I was just going to say, I said this to an atheist. I've got a series on my YouTube channel called Belief, and I actually connected with this guy, Lucas, who's an atheist. And I said to him, if atheists woke up tomorrow in a world without religion, they would probably kill themselves. Because they'd be so profoundly bored at the fact they have nothing to rail against.
Yeah, I mean, look, maybe they would, maybe they wouldn't. I think the problem, and I think you're pointing it out, is a binary... If truth is binary, life is really, really, really boring. And in my experience, truth has never been binary. I mean, yes, there are elements of truth. There are facts. I get that. Gravity works pretty consistently as an example, but at least on Earth. I guess the thing, though, that, then it behaves really differently when you get outside of Earth. But I guess the thing that, Newtonian physics is very limited as an example. Einstein could not handle Niels Bohr very well because he didn't think God played dice for the universe, when in fact quantum mechanics shows that there's a lot of dice going on. But I think the great mysteries are what make life fundamentally as interesting, especially the older you get. And I expect people to approach truth in a binary way if they're, in college and just starting to understand rationalism, because it's like a new tool you've never used before. And so, of course, logic is going to, rational logic is going to be inspiring, and you're going to want to pursue that as deeply and fast as you can. And you should become an atheist for a little while, probably at that point.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And I think if someone's coming out of, if they've been going through and if they were enslaved to alcohol or drugs or sex or whatever, I would expect those people would probably join a fundamentalist church right away, because they don't make great decisions. The first step one of the first steps in the 12-step program is stop trusting your own judgments. When your brain tells you to do something, do the opposite for a while, because when you do the thing your brain tells you, you do really bad things. So I get
Yep.
I get that there are people who don't trust themselves to make great choices, and so they need a binary set of rules to just get through the day. Join the army, go to prison, whatever it is. I get it that when you're in college and you're just discovering logic and rationalism, and you think it's a really powerful tool, because it is. It gave us very comfortable lives. It gave us a scientific method as an example. You're discovering that, you're like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. But hopefully move through that, because I think what you also find is there's much bigger, more powerful tools. That's why phenomenology, existentialism, and the progression of philosophy have moved so far past rational logic, which are very useful tools. We still use them every day, but that's not the end. That's not the final answer. There are much bigger questions that are much more interesting, that are much more profound, that allow us to wrestle in much more engaging ways with the great mystery that's around us.
I guess just to land this whole thing, I mean, on a very personal note, I'm wondering, as this kind of entrepreneur kind of person that you are, how do you, I guess my question is quite blunt, how do you deal with people that are not you? Like, how do you navigate relationships? And because I find myself getting endlessly frustrated with people that don't think like me.
I get frustrated as well. I try to be, when I'm at my best, which isn't every day or every moment, when I'm at my best, I encourage people who are locked in systems and don't realize it. And I think realizing that people are locked in systems and don't realize it is one of the first big steps to being a better person yourself. So if I'm at an airport and there's somebody standing there and she's telling me that, my ticket only allows me to do X, Y, and Z, I start encouraging them. Rather than be the guy shouting, I say, I have great faith in you that you're going to find a solution to this problem, because I don't understand your system as well as you do, but I know you can find an exception in the system. I know there's an anomaly. I know we can figure out a way through this. There is a way we can break out of this matrix, and I know you be the one that finds it, and that will, and there's greatness inside you that will, and I do it in a way where they start laughing and chuckling, and we start doing, but you know what's funny? When they start laughing and we're doing it together, they usually find a solution. Yeah. And I think that's when I'm operating at my best. When we do a lot of big events, a lot of club parties, a lot of outdoor events. When I'm talking to people that I don't know, who have no reason to really care about me, what I like to come back to them with is, because usually they're there because they like our drinks and they like the events we do, and maybe they're interested in some of the opportunities behind it. I say, look, we're not here to sell you anything. Really not. And, I'm guessing some of you are frustrated. You haven't been able to you've been waiting to get chosen by the right team or the right school or the right profession, and you weren't. And I said, guess what? I wasn't either. In fact, I was kicked out of a pretty good one. Stop waiting for that construct to choose you. Build your own. Yeah. Choose yourself, because the first most powerful thing that you can decide to do is you can start choosing yourself every single day. Doesn't mean you go quit your job tomorrow and you can't feed yourself. But it means you can increment, like you starting a podcast, you deciding, hey, I might be this guy living in New Zealand, far away from some of the big cities on earth, but there's the internet. And there are simple tools that you can build a podcast. And I can reach anyone on this planet with my podcast if I talk about things that will compel them to come listen to me.
Yeah.
I don't have to wait for all, I talk about this a lot in business, because business logic is very, very simple. It's your basic inductive, deductive reasoning. And there's much bigger forms of logic. There's causal logic, like storytelling as an example, which is much more powerful. That's what emerging brands use. And I say, look, the average, consumer packaged goods marketer will look at a chart and they'll put all the data points on it, and then they'll draw a trend line through those data points. And I like to point out to people, the trend line isn't real. That person drew it there. The only real things on that map are the data points. And those data points don't have to go in the direction of the trend line. Those data points are individual points that can go anywhere they want to on that map. The opportunity, if you're not if you're not the 800-pound gorilla that can intersect those and own where they're going, the opportunity is to create white space where you can create a big enough and compelling enough story to attract people. It doesn't have to be all of them, where you can start to attract those data points to what you're doing, because you're doing something so special, so valuable to those people that no one else is doing, that they all want to come talk to you. I think that's what that's what Milo's doing.
Yeah.
And that's the opportunity today. You don't need them all. You don't need a mass market. what you can do is find the people that you care about and that care about what you're doing, where you add value to them and they, give you value back. That's where great relationships happen. And it has never been easier in the history of the world to create something, whether it's a business, a church, a podcast, a school. I don't care what it is. Find that, as Steve Martin said, find your special purpose. And, using context a little differently, but find your special purpose and pursue it relentlessly.
Yeah.
Because when you find, I think Rob was talking about that with his new book, How to Be Here, is all about that.
Yeah.
How do you focus? How do you identify? When I was trying to figure it out at one point, Jim Collins, who wrote some really big books, was at the Harvard Business School. He wrote Built to Last, Good to Great. I happened to connect with him through a guy who had him as a professor, and it was before he was real famous. And he sent me his hedgehog concept, and he said, David, I view this as three overlapping circles, your classic Venn diagram. What is it that you can be best in the world at? What is your comparative advantage? Connected to, what is it people actually pay you money for? Because you got to eat, right? You got to find some way to at least earn a living. Followed by, what is it that you're passionate about? When you can find where those three things intersect, you can invest your entire life into that, and you'll feel like your whole life is fulfilled. It's really hard to figure out what that is, and you've got to try a lot of things to find that, and you've got to get really good at some of them. But if you will relentlessly pursue that, and if you will put all of your free time into doing that, maybe you have to have a job doing something you don't like for example, working at a call center, maybe you don't like that. But if you will invest yourself, and, for example, your podcast, eventually you'll build a following of people who can't get enough of what you're doing and start offering value that you can somehow monetize. Not that you're doing it to monetize it, but it allows you to totally focus on that thing rather than have to spend, 40 hours a week doing something you hate.
That, David, just to jump in, I mean, the whole thing about monetizing a podcast, like, we literally just had a podcasting conference here in New Zealand. It's like podcasting is booming right now, And
right.
I of course I'd love to do this full time, absolutely. But as you say, like I certainly do not do it to make money. But
no.
But it's like I love what you're saying. It's like as a byproduct of making money, it means you can do it more, right?
Right. And maybe doing the podcast leads you to the thing that you really do that makes all the money. I mean, Rob is a really interesting example where he started a church. And you don't make a ton of money, running a church, no matter how big it is, if you're doing it ethically, in my opinion. Creflo Dollar, but I think if you're doing it, by the way, his name is Creflo Dollar. What do you expect? But but I think if you're doing it, it leads you to the thing that you can ethically make money at and create a lifestyle that is sustainable and allows you to do the thing full time that you really want to do. In Rob's case, it was write books and do speaking tours. And I think, so maybe the podcast isn't where you earn a living. Maybe the podcast is always your vocation. It's your calling. You should be doing it. And you should be doing as much as you can. But maybe it's a book that spawns off of it. Maybe it's something else that is more monetizable that allows you to make it full time.
Somewhere I've thought this for years. Literally, somebody years ago said to me when I was in youth group, they said, they basically said, you're going to write a book one day, And I was like, I've always had this, and I've kind of made half-assed attempts and tried, but I swear there is a book in my head.
Yeah, no, I trust me. I'm sure there is. And the hard part of writing books is actually, sitting down and writing it. It's the war of art. It's literally sitting down and fighting through.
Rob talks about this actually. He talks about when you're sitting down in front of like a Word document and it's the blinking line, sort of like, come at me, like just challenging you, sort of thing. I love that.
Well, and I would encourage, seriously, come to one of Rob's 2 days. He has workshops where people bring their ideas and he works on them with you. And they're profound because they help you break through the things that's stopping you and help you focus. Because he knows, look, he's fought through probably all the things you're fighting through. And it's just, when you get around people who've done it, there's The War of Art is one of the best books on writing that I've ever read, or Stephen King's book on writing, or Hemingway's book on writing. And pretty much what they all say is you got to do the work. I mean, it all starts with sitting in a coffee shop talking about it, or on a podcast talking about it. Won't get it done. The way you get it done is you sit down and you write for 2 to 4 hours every single day when you're getting started.
Yeah.
It may have turned into longer time later, but if you listen to Brene Brown, she's been on, or not Brene Brown,
Elizabeth Gilbert.
Elizabeth Gilbert. she talks about the exact same thing, that she has cycles in her life, in her business of writing books, where there are times where she just goes and writes, and there are times when she has to promote what she's writing, and there's times where she has to speak about what she's writing. And knowing those cycles, learning how it works, doing it, and learning from someone who's done it really well, and trying to figure out how it's going to work for you. I mean, those are the big keys. Doing it, and then going and meeting with people who do it, and then doing more of it yourself, and having good editors you work with. I mean, that's ultimately how it gets done. And look, it's not simple, it's not easy, it's different for everybody, but until you start doing it consistently, it's not going to happen.
Yeah, for sure. Awesome. Well, on that note, I think we'll wind down, David, but that was awesome, man. That was such a sweet chat.
Hey, thanks for inviting me onto your show and your podcast.
Yeah.
And we really look forward to meeting you. Next time I'm in New Zealand, I will make sure I look you up and we get together. Be super fun.
Awesome.
Or if you're ever in Southern California, Mark.
Yeah, I don't even have a passport at this point in my life, but that's terrible.
There's a lot of people getting into America without passports.
Oh wow.
Yeah.
Yeah, nice. All right, well, we'll just stop there at that point.